Back in 2005, Psychonauts 1 received a lot of praise from players and critics alike. Unfortunately, because of the low sales, the game was considered a commercial failure, and after that, the future of the IP was very uncertain. Although the game's director Tim Schafer did want to create a sequel, the lack of proper funding required for developing the game stalled any attempts of creation for a long time. This game actually has quite an interesting story behind it. From a successful crowdfunding campaign to getting a deal with a publisher that went into bankruptcy a few years later to getting acquired by Microsoft as part of the Xbox Game Studios. I won't go into all the details, but it's quite a miracle that this game was finally able to release. And I'm happy that it did, because the first game was very unique. I really like it, and recently I replayed it before starting this one. So in this video I will be comparing the two games at some points to see where the sequel improved and where it fell lacking. So without further ado, let's get into my experience with Psychonauts 2. First things first, the visual presentation here is fantastic. The game has a very cartoony and vibrant art style and is still full of small environmental details and smooth visual effects. You will be constantly seeing new scenery throughout the game, and the overall scale of the world is way bigger than the first game. The attention to detail in the levels is phenomenal. If you just stop and look around for a minute, you will always find a few hidden collectibles. In almost every single area, you will find multiple things to collect. Some are right there in plain sight, while some are cleverly hidden behind a small puzzle. There are about the same number of levels as the first game, but in my opinion none of them reach the same height as the Milkman Conspiracy or the Napoleon board game level. With that said, they are still pretty good. Structurally, they are way more linear and more platforming focused, yet they each pack a lot of fun, have some really nice set pieces, and look great. The performance on the PC version is also very good. Any decent modern system can run this game on 60 FPS while maintaining great visual settings. Just like most of the early 2000s 3D animation, the character designs have not aged that well, and sometimes they do feel very out of place in the more modern looking environments. The facial animations look just okay. They aren't bad, just not on par with the visuals of the rest of the game. Otherwise, I loved the art direction of everything else and have no complaints on the level design. When you start the game for the first time, you get a really nice animated recap of the previous titles, which is great for people who have not played those in a while. The story picks up after the ending of Rhombus of Ruin. We resume right back on the jet, and after this small gameplay sequence, we arrive in the Psychonaut headquarters, which acts as our new main hub for the rest of the game. Upon landing, we learn that the organization has a mole, and an extremely dangerous psychic called Meligula will be resurrected if we don't act quickly. Just after playing the first few hours, I knew that this game was writing-wise going to be way different than the prequel. And I was completely right. The dialogues are not nearly as absurd or funny as the first one, which is a problem because there is a lot more dialogue and cutscenes in this one. I also didn't like how we don't see any kids from the summer camp at all. I personally found them really fun and missed them throughout my playthrough. We do get a bunch of new characters, but I didn't like them nearly as much. At least the 3 instructors and Lily from the first game are here, though for a very short time. We also get to meet all the members of Raz's family, and personally, other than his dad, I couldn't care much about any of them. I really didn't like how rushed the story was in a lot of places. At the start, the game just throws a lot of plot developments at you and then puts you right into this big open area. Also, the ending is very abrupt, with just a small cutscene after the final boss that felt very weird. You do get some closure with a few post-game dialogues, but nothing too compelling. With all that said, my biggest complaint of this game is Raz. His character, just what have they done to him? He feels like a complete pushover in this game. Almost in every single interaction he is on the receiving end. At the start he gets played a few times and I completely understand he is still a kid, but he just can't catch a break in the main story. I really didn't like how Raz's character turned out in this one. I guess that's on me for expecting him to be a bit more assertive after his past missions. And he is still adventurous, but also looks way more static and gullible. I honestly didn't like him in this game at all. What I did like was the backstories of these Psychic 6 members. Most of them are really dark. Like the first game was dark too, but this one is a lot less subtle about the mature stuff. You also learn a lot about the Psychonauts organization and all of their unfortunate past. I'm not gonna lie, I found the lore and backstories about the past of the Psychonauts way more interesting than the main story. Even though I've been so critical of the story, I must say it does pick up in the second half and becomes a lot better pacing wise. I think my biggest problem with the writing is that it's just not funny. Most of the subtle jokes were a miss, and there is nothing that matches the absurdity and humor of the first game. In that one, I loved going back to the camp, talking to the kids, and hearing if they have a new story or jokes to tell. Here, I have little reason to return or talk to people because of how boring the dialogues were. However, the writing is definitely a lot more emotional, and I think it does well on that part. Some moments in the story are very heartwarming, and they do make the lack of humor a lot more bearable. Gameplay wise, this one is definitely a lot more action focused. Just like the first, there are a lot of collectibles in this game. Figments, memory vaults, backtags, psycards, brains, and a few other things that you can find while exploring. This time we have a lot more coherent leveling system. All of the collectibles we get contribute to increasing our level, which then gives us intern credits that can be used to strengthen our psychic abilities. You're always rewarded for finding stuff, so the overall progression system is great. There are also a lot more combat encounters in 2 compared to the first, which is not inherently a bad thing cause the combat has been improved significantly. You can use 4 psychic abilities simultaneously, and there is also a new dodge button that you'll have to get used to. There is definitely still a lot of jank in the combat. It's not perfect, but it's still functional enough to be fun. What keeps the combat interesting is the improved enemy variety. You'll find a new type of enemy in almost every mental world, and they each have their own weaknesses. Some are weak to fire, some can only be reached with a Psy Blast, and some you'll have to slow down to even land a hit. These new enemies make the combat a lot more fun. The boss fights are a big improvement too. While nothing is groundbreaking like Dark Souls or God of War, each boss has their own gimmick that makes them unique. Just like the first game, you go inside the mind of a character in this interactive world, where you learn about their past troubles and their insecurities. I like how every single world has a completely different theme and atmosphere than the last one. The level design is overall very consistent. None of the stages ever felt boring or annoying to complete. My favorite mental world was by far the cooking show one. Making the dishes against the timer and presenting them was easily the highlight of the game for me. Even the boss fight is my favorite. One huge problem with the game is that the cutscenes interrupt gameplay way too often. Just as I'm getting into the groove and start enjoying the level, I get interrupted by a few second long cutscene. There is a depressing amount of small cutscenes in this game, and these happen so many times in every single level, it completely breaks my flow and just feels really annoying to watch in an adventure focused game. I hate that you can't skip lines of dialogues in a conversation like you could in the first game. Sometimes I just want to get through the optional dialogue quickly, so I just read the subtitles and skip the voice lines, but there is no option to do that here. For a game with so many optional interactions, I found the lack of a fast forward or skip the line option really weird. Putting that aside, we do get 3 new psychic abilities as we progress. We can now travel in the air through these mental connection points, slow down time around an object, and even summon an archetype to help us with the puzzles. All of these abilities are also quite useful in combat. We do also lose 3 abilities from the first game to, I guess, compensate for the new powers. Invisibility, shield, and confusion are with us no more. Also, levitation movement does not feel as smooth as it was in the first game. You can't attack while rolling, and you can't jump as high as you could in the first game. It's just a huge downgrade. There are some nice accessibility options in the settings for people who need them. Always nice to see these. The soundtrack also stands out. Most of the tracks fit perfectly with the theme of the level and are a nice listen even outside the game. The voice acting is also good, and there is really nothing to complain about audio-wise. In the end, I will say that Psychonauts 2 is a good game. There is definitely a lot of artistic talent that went into creating it, but I just have mixed or negative feelings on a lot of its elements, and I did ended up being disappointed by the end. I kinda just wanted more of Psychonauts fun's randomness, ridiculous dialogues, and unique levels. Instead, I got a serious and more mature story, which isn't bad, but I still wanted a game more similar to 1. I overall enjoyed my time with Psychonauts 2, but I was also very annoyed several times. It's definitely not a perfect game, and I also feel it's a little overhyped. If the first game was an A+, then this would be a B for me. Good game, just not the sequel I was expecting. With all that said, the game does have its moments, with some beautiful set pieces, well designed levels, and heartwarming story scenes. Unfortunately, the main title screen is not playable, so I'll have to give this game a 1 out of 10. Thanks for watching till the end. Like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below, and I'll see you in the next one.